And welcome to Bible Break with me, Steve Griffiths. Hope you're keeping all right today. And we're going to be thinking today about Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. You know, the passage about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That is probably one of the best known passages in Scripture, I should think, and probably one of the most widely interpreted. Lots and lots of different ideas around about who these four horsemen are. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today. And I would love to hear from you. If you want to leave a comment, if you want to engage in the conversation, it'd be great for us to chat together about this and to think about, well, okay, what have you heard about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and how have you been traditionally interpreting these characters from Scripture? And anything else you want to have a chat about, then please pop it on the comments, and we can chat together. So these four horsemen of the apocalypse, really, really well-known biblical characters. There's a lot of different interpretations about them, and over the years, the interpretations of who these four characters are have changed a lot. And it seems to me that a large part of the book of Revelation is describing the state of the world between the first coming of Jesus in Bethlehem and his second coming in glory when he returns at the end of time. And John, who wrote the book of Revelation around about AD 96, is writing in picture language. He's writing in dream language. It describes a vision that he had and that he was sharing with his churches. And he's using this kind of dream language and this picture language to express spiritual realities that you know, there's no earthly way of being able to talk about except through dream language. Does that make sense? So the book of Revelation then is looking at the all the things that are going to happen in the world between the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus, and looking at it from 7 different perspectives as well. But I've done some other stuff on my channel to explore the background of the book of Revelation. So check out one of the podcasts, is what I would say there. And then in chapter 6 of Revelation, John mentions these four horsemen. And so who do they represent? Well, he wasn't the first person to have talked about this issue. Jesus talks about the issue as well, and they are mentioned in other parts of the Bible. So who do these four horsemen represent? Well, let's look at horseman number 1 in Revelation chapter 2. John writes this: I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. Now, some people have interpreted this to represent Jesus because he's wearing a crown and he is going out to conquer. But you know, I think in the context of what John is writing and in the context of this chapter of Scripture, that's pretty unlikely. Instead, I think that what this horseman represents is war between nations. Now, in Mark chapter 13, verse 8, when Jesus is talking about the end times, he says that nation will rise up against nation. And that's what I believe the rider of this white horse represents. Firstly, he's holding a bow in his hands, which was a weapon of war, and he conquers. It says he conquers, which implies a sort of foreign power invading a country and defeating it. And the sad reality is, of course, that the history of humanity is littered with war after war after war. That's something we obviously see in our own time as well, isn't it? And the various wars and conflicts that are going on around the world. And we do pray for all victims of war at the current time. So the first horseman, the rides the white horse, represents war. But then we come on to horseman number 2 in Revelation 6, verse 4. It says this: Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. Now that sounds like the first horseman, doesn't it? He's given a large sword, given the power to take peace in the earth, to kill each other. It sounds like he's bringing war as well, but I don't think he is. There's a subtle difference here. The first horseman carries a bow, which is a weapon of war. But this second horseman carries a large sword, and the Greek word that is used here for this type of sword is a word machaira. And that was a particular type of sword in those days. It was a Roman sword used by civil authorities to execute rebels. So I think that what this second horseman of the apocalypse represents is internal civil war in which people attack one another, they slay one another, and the authorities, in a sense, have that power and authority. So that too is similar to what Jesus wrote about in Mark 13. This time in verse 12, Jesus says, "Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death." And we know, don't we, that there are many, many civil wars raging across the world at the moment as well. So it's important for us to pray for all those who are struggling with civil wars, to pray for those countries where political divisions are so deep that it's negatively impacting relationships and local communities. So here we have then these first two horsemen of the apocalypse. The first one representing war between nations. The second one representing civil war within societies. And then we come on to horseman of the apocalypse number 3. And we can go back to Mark chapter 13 again here and see what Jesus says in verse 8. He says, "There will be earthquakes in various places and famines." Now, the third horseman of the apocalypse represents those famines. And here's why. Because when we read about this horseman number 3, we see that he's carrying scales in his hands, which suggests that the food is going to be carefully weighed and rationed out. And secondly, as the horseman rides out, a voice from heaven says, "Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures, saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and wine." Now, 2 pounds of wheat, when John was writing this letter, 2 pounds of wheat was deemed necessary for a working man to eat each day. So here the voice is saying a day's wages for one day's food. And all that would be left for the man's family would be the inferior barley, which was the poor man's food. And even 6 pounds for a day's wages, even if he had the money, would be a starvation diet for them all. So these are really rationed and really expensive foods. But then it also says in that verse, "Do not damage the oil and wine." Now, the oil and the wine are luxury items. And we know, don't we, that even in times of famine, even when the ordinary people of a country may be starving or struggling, we know that those in authority, we know that the rich manage to carry on enjoying the luxuries of life. While the ordinary people suffer and struggle and starve, the rich people still live in their mansions and their palaces, and they enjoy the finest food and drink. The wheat is unaffordable, the barley is unaffordable, but the oil and the wine remain unaffected. So here we have then the third horseman of the apocalypse representing famine. So the first one is war between nations. The second one is civil war in society. And the third horseman of the apocalypse represents famines. And so we come on to finally the horseman number 4. And in verse 8 of Revelation 6, we read this. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, I think the identity of this horseman is the most difficult one of all. And the description given here is a bit more detailed than the other horsemen as well. Firstly, the horse is described as being pale. Now, the word for pale that is used here to describe that horse is only used about 4 times in the New Testament. And the other 3 times the word is used, it means a pale green, a sort of sickly green. So I think that this is making us think about people who are sick and ill and on the point of death. And the name of the rider is Death as well. But that seems a bit confusing, doesn't it? Because the other 3 riders, the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, have also brought death as well. But the Greek word used here in this verse 8 for death can also mean plague or pestilence. So when Jesus speaks about the end times in Luke 21, verse 11, Jesus says, there will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places. So it seems to me that this 4th horseman of the apocalypse represents those who will die from plagues and pestilences and disease. And then behind this 4th horse, we're told, walks Hades. Let's read the verse again. Its rider was named Death or Pestilence, and Hades was following close behind. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So Hades, then, in Scripture, is the place of the dead. And this verse gives us a symbolic number of 25% of people who will die through wars and civil wars and famines and plagues. Now, don't forget that this isn't describing a single catastrophic event. The book of Revelation, as I say, is describing the sort of general way the world is between the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus. It's not a single catastrophic event. So I think that what John is saying here in this passage is a general comment that a large proportion of human deaths between the first coming and the second coming of Jesus will be sadly unnecessary. They will be the result of human behaviors, the result of war, the result of civil war, the result of famine, and the result of plague. So these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse throughout the years have caused such consternation, haven't they, in such a wide and wild variety of interpretations about who they actually are. But I think actually in the context of Scripture and in the context in which John is writing, they're not to be feared as these 4 horsemen who are just going to appear one day in a kind of catastrophic event at the end of time that we need to be frightened of. It's picture language. It's picture language to describe the natural course of events, as it were, of how the world will be between the first coming and the second coming of Jesus. The first rider represents war between nations. The second rider represents civil war and civil strife between citizens. The third rider represents famine, and the fourth rider represents plague and pestilence. So this passage, then, it seems to me, isn't one to be, it's not particularly mysterious. It's not a passage for us to be scared of. It's just outlining the events that we are all too familiar with in this day and age, and has always been the case since Jesus came to earth at Bethlehem, and will always be the case up till his second coming. Our world will be hallmarked with events of misery, war, civil disorder, famine, and plague. It's not a particularly happy picture, is it? But it is a statement of the reality of the world in which we live. And I think that what can we get out of this for ourselves? Well, firstly, just to kind of be aware that this is how the world is. And this is the reality of the world around us, but also to inspire us to pray for those who are victims in war, to pray for those who are struggling with civil war in their countries, to pray for those who are experiencing famine, and to pray for those who are struggling with disease and plague of any nature, and to ask God to be with them in their troubles. So there we are. That's my understanding of Revelation chapter 6, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I hope you found that useful. And if you have, then please do like the, the video and subscribe to the channel. So thanks very much for being with me. And I look forward to being with you again really soon. Take care. Bye.